The city of Atlanta was bustling as usual, the streets crowded with the usual mix of people, commuters rushing to work, tourists taking photos, and locals going about their day-to-day lives. But on the corner of 5th and Main, a man sat quietly on the curb, his back against the brick wall of a closed storefront. His clothes were ragged, his face unshaven, and his hands calloused from a life that seemed to have forgotten him. This was Johnny Carter, a homeless black veteran who, despite the medals he once wore with pride, had long since lost his place in the world. Johnny wasn't a stranger to hardship. After serving in the military, he had returned home with dreams of a future that would be brighter than the dark days of war. But the promise of peace and security that came with civilian life had never materialized for him. The transition from military service had been brutal. No one prepared him for how hard it would be to find a job, to build a life, or to feel at home in a world that had moved on without him. Now he spent his days surviving, navigating the complex system that seemed indifferent to people like him. A man who had given everything for his country, now left with nothing but memories and a war he couldn't shake off, even though it was long over. On that particular morning, he had found his usual spot by the wall. It wasn't the best place, but it was out of the way enough that the police didn't hassle him too often. He wasn't hurting anyone, just trying to get by. But today was different. He had only just settled into his corner when he saw a group of officers approaching him. "Hey, you can't be here," one of them said gruffly. Johnny looked up slowly, meeting the officer's gaze. "I ain't hurting nobody," he said, his voice tired, almost resigned. "I'm just trying to get some rest." The officer glanced around at his partners, then back at Johnny. "Doesn't matter. This is private property. You're trespassing." Johnny's brow furrowed. "Private property?" he repeated. "This is a public sidewalk, man." "It doesn't matter," the officer said firmly. "I'm asking you to move along." Johnny didn't want trouble. He never did. But something about the way the officer spoke stung. He had heard that tone before. He knew what it meant. It wasn't just about the rules anymore. It was about someone like him being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I'll move. Just give me a second," Johnny said quietly, trying to gather his things. But before he could stand up, another officer, younger and more impatient, moved in closer. "You heard him," the younger officer barked. "Move it." Johnny's heart raced. He stood up, his legs shaky from the years of not having a proper bed, not having a place to sleep that wasn't the cold concrete of a street corner. He reached for his old military jacket, worn thin and tattered, the insignia on it almost completely faded. He didn't look like a threat, but to them, he was just another problem to deal with. "I'm going, all right," Johnny muttered, his hands shaking as he gathered his things. He wasn't causing any trouble, but he could feel the tension rise. Without another word, the officers began to walk away, and Johnny took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. But the worst was yet to come. As he turned to leave, the younger officer grabbed his arm. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Johnny jerked his arm away, his eyes wide in surprise. "I'm going. Just let me go." "Not so fast," the officer said, his voice hard. "You're under arrest for trespassing." Johnny stared at him, confused. "What?" "I didn't." The officer pulled out a set of handcuffs. "You're not going anywhere, old man." The world seemed to tilt for a moment, Johnny's heart racing faster now. The last thing he wanted was to be locked up, but as the cold metal clicked around his wrists, that was exactly where he was headed. A few days later, Johnny found himself in a courtroom, sitting in a metal chair, his hands still cuffed in front of him. The courtroom was filled with people, some here for work, others for family matters, but the whispers were all the same. They were staring at him, at the old man in the faded military jacket, sitting in front of them like some kind of criminal. Johnny's mind raced. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had just been trying to survive. He had spent so many nights alone on the streets, but now, somehow, he was the one being treated like a problem. The judge, a middle-aged woman with stern glasses and a no-nonsense attitude, cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice echoing in the room, "you've been accused of trespassing. How do you plead?" Johnny swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "Not guilty, Your Honor," he he said, his voice steady but quiet. The prosecutor, a young man in a well-fitted suit, stood up. He looked at Johnny with a mix of pity and indifference. Your Honor, the defendant was found on private property, trespassing after being asked to leave multiple times. His refusal to cooperate with the officers led to his arrest. Johnny felt his chest tighten. This wasn't fair. He wasn't a criminal. He was just trying to survive. His lawyer, an older woman with silver hair and a calm demeanor, stood up next to him. She addressed the court in a soft, measured voice. Your Honor, we acknowledge that Mr. Carter was on private property, but we must ask the court to consider his circumstances. He is a homeless veteran who has served our country with honor. This arrest was not made with malicious intent, but due to the conditions that Mr. Carter finds himself in. The judge paused, her eyes softening as she glanced at Johnny. I understand, Miss Harris, she said, her voice more measured. But the law is clear. We cannot allow anyone to disregard the rules. Johnny felt his stomach churn. He wanted to speak, to tell them about the years of service he had given to his country, the struggles he faced when he returned home. He wanted to explain that he wasn't just another homeless man. He was a veteran, someone who had fought for his country, someone who had bled for the freedom that so many took for granted. But he kept quiet, too afraid that if he spoke, he would only make things worse. It was then that the judge did something unexpected. She leaned forward, her gaze softening as she looked directly at Johnny. Mr. Carter, she said, I'm going to ask the prosecution to drop the charges. However, I do think it's time we take a closer look at your situation. Johnny blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. What? He whispered. We're going to ensure that you get the help you need, she said. You served your country. It's time this country serves you. The words hit Johnny harder than he had anticipated. The courtroom, filled with people who had been watching him like he was just another problem to be solved, now seemed to shift in tone. There was something different in the air. Maybe, just maybe, people were starting to see him for who he really was. In the weeks that followed, Johnny's life took an unexpected turn. He was assigned a caseworker who specialized in helping homeless veterans. With their support, Johnny was able to secure a spot in a rehabilitation program for veterans who had fallen through the cracks of the system. He found himself surrounded by others who understood his struggles, and slowly, he began to heal. He wasn't the man he used to be. Too much had happened to him. But for the first time in years, Johnny felt like there might be a chance for him to rebuild, to have a life that wasn't defined by the harshness of the streets. He would never forget that day in court, when he was called not a criminal, but a man in need. And for the first time in a long time, Johnny Carter began to believe that there was still hope, even for someone like him. That's the story, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a pleasure sharing it with you all. Don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's always fun to see the global reach of these stories. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories, tips, and tricks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. If you'd like to show some extra love, tap the 3 dots near the share button and send a super thanks.